Yeah, films. We watched some films. Let's talk about those.
So I wanted to talk about in this episode, because like next week we'll be talking about actual we're going to be focusing on Parable of the Sower and Talents, and just some of those themes and things that are happening. But I wanted to talk about Octavia Butler overall and like what her impact is in the writing world, but also like what she focused on when she was creating, and like how those come through, these themes come through in all of her different writings. So essentially, Octavia Butler is a staple of science fiction and Afrofuturism, which, if you are unfamiliar, Afrofuturism is a movement in literature, music, art, etc., that features futuristic or science fiction themes, which incorporate elements of Black history and culture. Octavia looked to highlight the horrors of our present world's oppressive systems. She tackles slavery, white supremacy, capitalism, climate change, fascism, religious fundamentalism, and more. Always in little bits and everything, right?
Yeah.
And she has been even called the mother of Afrofuturism and has inspired many Black science fiction writers today. And she is known for her ability to write terrifyingly prescient stories that are able to grab like real world horrors of her time and make predictions of our outcomes. They're like too real. Oftentimes where I'm like, oh my gosh. So in 1993, Octavia published Parable of the Sower, and it's a dystopian future tale set in the not too distant future of 2024. Tomorrow. The world she builds is one of fierce hopelessness and forced resistance. Gas prices make vehicles nearly obsolete. People find themselves enslaved by companies to make ends meet. Drugged communities set fire to towns in desire to destroy the rich. Police are expensive and help only the rich. Jobs are nearly non-existent. Religious groups take control of the government. And education is impossible. Sounds really familiar.
Industry towns, they're trying to make a comeback.
It's real. It's like modern slavery.
Maybe they'll work this time, Gabe.
Sorry to bother you. Definitely inspired by Octavia Butler for sure. This futuristic hellscape feels a bit too close for comfort when reading in today's political climate. And further, in her sequel, Parable of the Talents, there's a right-wing conservative and Christian political leader who's running for presidential office and has used the slogan, "Make America Great Again."
Honestly?
93. And to be fair, that is because it has been a phrase that has been used previously. So Trump was not the first to think of this. But this Jarrett, the character who is running under that, and more so, not even just that character, because he's actually kind of smart. Trump is not smart. But there are little things that like I'll talk about next week, but it's really more for me the followers of Jarrett that feel very, very realistic to what we have for followers of Trump. But one of my favorite things about Talents, and it was horrifying, was when they were voting, they voted for the other guy who wasn't Jarrett, who was a former or current vice president. And they voted for him, and they were like, we didn't want to vote for him, but we had to. And it was better to have a man who had nothing in his head than a man who can destroy the planet. So I was like,
Oh no!
That wasn't what just freaking happened to me. Like I didn't want to. Okay, I was like, Octavia,
I still to read it.
Octavia, please, why do you do this to me? So amazing. But furthermore, like not just her, like what I really love about it is like she does, like there are those horrifying things that I think. A lot of people have been referencing, especially now with the overturning of Roe v. Wade and other societal issues that are coming to light. They're like, oh my gosh, like Octavia has been telling you about this for a long time. Like she's told you about it already. But I think on top of that, there's all these horrifying real life things that are happening, but there's also this thread of what it means to be human and exploring like humanity overall that comes through in all of her works that comes from a really genuine place of not like hate. Like it's never like these places and people in power, like they're messed up. It's awful, but there's also good. And so it's kind of like there's an option. We can do something about it. And so I think it's interesting because she's also explored what it means to be human, like our flaws, our biases, and our successes. And she forces us to confront our history and our potential future. In Dawn, which is her science fiction trilogy under Lilith's Brood, and the only science fiction book I've ever been able to stomach, like, and read and be like, oh, this is actually really cool. And I'll be like, I don't care. I don't need the white man savior for the whole galaxy.
Yeah.
Cannot stand it. So Dawn, highly recommend, even if you don't like sci-fi, because I'm not a big sci-fi person like that. Amazing. And in Dawn, she has her protagonist, Lilith Ayapo, who wakes aboard a ship that belongs to the Owen Collie, which is a breed of alien that had rescued her and other humans from the uninhabitable Earth, a world that was made deadly by our own wars and hate.
Yes.
The Owen Collie diagnose humans. This is my favorite part. This is the part that like stuck with me. Like, the rest of the book was like a lot of things happening, but I couldn't get over this. So the Owen Collie diagnosed humans with the incurable defect of hegemony. Yeah. So our desire and need to have caste systems, people in power, and rankings of any sort have guaranteed our downfall. They were like, it's in your genes. You will. Yeah. The reason why all of your civilizations have fallen is because you have ranked each other. You have had a sense of superiority instead of equality, and you've brought about your own destruction because of that, when you could have just loved each other. And there's no way out of it. So our only chance of avoiding another world-ending fate like we had before the book takes place would be to actually breed children with the Owen Collie, which would prompt the next step in our evolution and ensure that we'll have grounded beings who can be equal to one another, which is also like, it brings out, like, what does it mean to be human? Are we still human if we're half Owen Collie? Is that okay? Are we still human if we're not, like, hegemonic beings? Like, what does that mean? And so that just, like, you're thinking, like, oh, we have a defect. What is it? You're going to tell me the scientific thing. And it was like, it's because you guys all, like, have a caste system and you think you're better than other people and you're all the same. And I was like, okay. It's like, you got me there. In Kindred, which I mentioned I had read in college, Octavia's protagonist, Dana, is a 1970s feminist Black woman who is transported back in time and is then forced to protect her white ancestor on the slave plantation. And if she doesn't, she will be erased for good. So there's a lot to unpack in that story, but Dana really grapples with these expectations and must reckon with her history, the history of this country, and the impact it had on her modern living. She also has a white husband in it who goes back in time at some point, and there's a lot of, like, conversations and thoughts that are pretty interesting, and a way to kind of look at how we view activism today, like who we're putting our trust in. Very interesting. And again, still, like, from a place of hope, like, we have to just reckon with the fact that those things happened and now we can move forward and do better, right? In Bloodchild, she introduces us to a boy tasked with giving birth, which is dismantling and confronting our expectations of birth, gender identity, and motherhood. In Wild Seed, sex changing and shape-shifting characters steer the narrative. So always against what we are expecting, especially in this genre, really forcing us to look at our world, how we see the world, how we see ourselves in the world, and how we see our heroes. Honestly, at the heart of it. And because her stories often feature strong femme protagonists who confront society's expectations of them while dismantling the oppressive ideologies that seek to hold them back, simply by existing and refusing to back down. Most often these protagonists were strong, intelligent Black women who encountered communities that doubted their abilities. Like, no, of course you can't do that. And for a variety of reasons. And without pushing back aggressively against these thoughts, they instead prove their knowledge and power through actions and patience. So just by doing, people are like, oh, wait, actually, I think you know what you're doing. It seems you got it together, and now I have to rethink why I thought that about you. And for genres that often center on whiteness, chosen one archetypes, and rely on heroes of certain demographics, straight, Octavia breaks many walls simply by being a voice in this genre. With Afrofuturism or Black speculative fiction, there is the intention to create and share worlds in which BIPOC people and cultures aren't erased.
Yeah.
She had the nerve to envision a future where we still exist. The audacity, where we can be the heroes and villains, and where we can be the answer. At the risk of being written out of the future, creators and writers like Octavia fought to write themselves back in, and to not be reduced to background characters, laborers, or step stools for white heroes to perch upon and succeed. Which is so important, and I'm so thankful to her for this. So in an article that I found on Princeton University's library site titled Afrofuturism, How Octavia Butler is Moving Us Forward by Julie Melby, they explain her messages, saying, beginning in the 1970s, her narratives upended the primarily white, male-dominated genre of science fiction occupied by George Orwell, H.G. Wells, and Ray Bradbury by introducing heroines such as Parable's Lauren Olamina, a 15-year-old Black girl who dares to undertake a perilous journey to make a new home for herself and her multiracial, multi-gender followers. Through Lauren, Butler tells us to embrace diversity, unite, or be divided, robbed, ruled, killed by those who see you as prey. Embrace diversity or be destroyed. Which reminds me of, I believe it was Adrienne Marie Brown who was saying, like, we got to rotate the crops of storytelling or our land's going to die, right? So it's just like, the only answer is to evolve, right? Is to accept each other, to work together. If that means the Oankali get in here, and we get to live. We get to keep going.
Yeah.
In her Patternist series, which starts with Wild Seed, she started writing when she was very young, as Kat was explaining, and it ended up being her first novel, but she actually wrote the story backward. She started with the Pattern Master, and that's the quote-unquote end of the series, and then worked backwards to discover the origin story and how did we get there to that story. Her writing was an outlet for her own troubles and a way to sort through her feelings in a dark world and find some piece of light. And seeing what was happening around her drove her to ask questions such as, what do we do to stop this? How can we convince others to change? And what happens if it keeps happening? And this outlet was her offer to help others with those very issues. And her works not only inspired new fiction writers, but also social activists who wanted to apply these lessons in the real world. Activists such as Adrienne Marie Brown, who co-edited an anthology of science fiction stories inspired by Octavia Butler titled Octavia's Brood, uses Octavia's lessons and implements them into her own strategies for change and community organizing. So like you were saying, Kat, like there's actionable items in the fiction. So there's actual people who are like, well, actually, we could use all of these things to do something right now.
Make society.
And Octavia's work still influence creators today, and her existence in the field made room for others, such as Tanana Reeve. There we go. Such as Tanana Reeve Dew from Horror Noir, and Adrienne Marie Brown to follow behind. She once said, if I hadn't written, I probably would have done something stupid that would have led to my death. And without her, our destiny amongst the stars may have never been known.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I got.
Nice.
Cool.
Look at us too.
Yeah. Kind of parts of this is that, I have read a few of her books. I have many to finish. Like I'm finishing up Parable of the Talents. I read Dawn, and I intend to read the rest of I have Adulthood Rights, and I have Wild Seed. I just haven't embarked on it yet. There's so many, and now we have this writer series, so I got to make sure I read everything else, and some of them are taking a lot of time. But I will say that like Dawn is so awesome, in just like, for me, it was very digestible as someone who can't really get over the lingo, and like it's such a created world that's so different from what we usually have in when you're reading a science fiction, that it like drives me crazy, because I'm like, I don't know what any of that means. So I'm like struggling. So even though I didn't know what everything means, she takes a lot of care to explain things, and like some people might find that annoying, but I thought I was very thankful for it. I enjoyed the Oankali. I thought it was like really interesting the way that they were portrayed. It was very smart, these aliens that exist. Like, it made sense to me biologically how they would exist. I'm just so fascinated by them. And really the exploration of people and what it means to be a human, and what we do when we're really confronted with the possibility of us dying off.
I really want to read all of them, honestly. Like, I've only read one at this point, and it was like the quickest book I've ever read ever in life. So like, I'm like, anything by I also want to read Octavia's Brood now too. That like that exists. I have that as well. Yeah, I'm gonna have to read it.
Yeah, and there's just a bunch of like other sci-fi writers who were inspired by her, so you can see like her legacy and see the impact that it had. And I think like so important about our characters really was like, we love a good, burn it down story. Love it. But I love that hers is like, we burn it down when that's like the last option. But before that is like, we kind of rise above. And we prove through action. Yeah. And we don't always get that in such a beautiful way. Like, like we can respect. Like, it doesn't feel like a cop-out. It feels intentional.
Well, yeah. And it's also like the villains aren't these like crazy over the top things. Like a lot of the time, or at least in Parables, they're like, it's just people, like people being people. Like it's not like one person is like, well, sometimes one person is worse than somebody else, but it's like a lot of the time it's just like humans humaning, surviving, being awful, and that's just like what is, instead of something crazy, some like big bad monstrous thing that actually doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. Well, it's like when we're talking about zombie films, right? Like zombies are there, they're scary, but really the horrors are the people, right? And so I think that's really what's interesting about hers, is that it really comes down to like humans are the villain and the heroes. And so you really have to like choose which lane you're in. And they're so realistic, especially Parable of the Sower and Talents. It's like, I know that person. And thinking like, how would I react? Would I do this? How do I feel? And I'm like, I'm not done with Talents, and I'm at a really stressful, sad part. And I'm like, oh no. So just a heads up, because it's really stressful. I was like,
well, it's like the idea of being a good person is like, it's not a static sense of being. You're not born a good person. Like, you actually have to work on it. And I think that's like a theme that I definitely picked up on. Like throughout. It was really interesting.
Yeah, I think Lauren is often working through that. And Talents, because we're hearing from other characters and we get to see through somebody else's eyes what Lauren looks like, is even better, because now it's like, she's just a person. She's a human.
It's like when you realize your parents are people.
Yeah. There's a John Steinbeck quote about that, like realizing your parents are humans, and it's like the gods have fallen kind of drama, that I always was like, yeah, that's so real. And it's funny because I grew up reading Ray Bradbury, George Orwell, H.G. Wells, and didn't know about her. And I will say, like, if I had, and I grew up and I saw characters that were like Lauren or Dana, like, and could find myself in them, I think I would have probably read science fiction earlier and more.
Yeah. And like maybe enjoyed it more too.
Because I was like, okay, cool, whatever. I was like, whatever, this guy went. White man, all right. Look at that hero again. What is this a metaphor for? Cool, that's great. So 10 out of 10. I'm so happy that we're starting out this series with Octavia Butler. I really hope it inspires you to read more of her work, or read her work, period. It is very easily digestible. There are some really horrifying things that happen, especially in Parable of the Sower, but you can get through it. If you have a weak stomach, then I recommend Dawn. It's not as tough. It's a lot of the bad has already happened by the time we get to Dawn, that it's more like a introspective kind of experience.
Like what would happen hundreds of years from now, or even like not so much that, but like sooner, but not while it's in transition.
Yeah. I really want to read the shape-shifting one.
Mhm.
And yeah, I will say this. If you enjoy Afrofuturism or genre work written about and by BIPOC creators, then you should check out Black Women Are Scary, which is an audio drama podcast that I do sound design on. It is produced by Dusky Projects, which is under Wimoto Naoka, who has been a guest on our show twice. 3 times maybe, the 3 times, and it's amazing. Each story is written by a BIPOC author. It is voice acted by a BIPOC actor, and then again sound designed by me most of the time, at least the second and third season. And they're really amazing works. And so if you want to see yourself reflected in just existing, it's literally like we're not everything is like, oh, we have these overarching political theories. It's just like we just have the audacity to also exist in these fantastical worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we're also a vampire hunter. That's cool.
Yeah.
Did you know you could do that? What? Yeah. So like, oh, we also have fairy magic powers. Like, what are like? So if you like it, highly recommend that as a good listen, especially if you like listening to books. And we go a step further because we put the whole world in it, and we put sound effects. I bet Octavia Butler would have loved it.
Yeah.
Genuinely. So, and just read books by Wimoto if you want. Yeah. Well, I think that's a great start to our series. Next week, you'll hear more about Parable of the Sower and a little bit about talents. I don't want to spoil too much with Kat.
I got to the end. Like, I literally have 36 pages of Handmaid's Tale left. So I was going to start Talents tomorrow morning.
Mm-hmm.
And if I read it fast enough, which I read Parable of the Sower in like 2 days of nonstop reading time. If I do that again, I think I can do it.
Yeah. Do like she did. Wake up 2 a.m. Read.
Yeah, that doesn't happen for me. I sleep all the way through the night unless I've had some sort of very horrifying nightmare to which I wake up for 2 seconds and then immediately fall asleep again.
Yeah, I'm good. I read all the time, reading all the time. And
I'm a nighttime person, sleep time.
If you are if you're following us on TikTok, I'm going to start doing some book reviews there, make a little book talk series. Mm-hmm. So you can check us out, and I'll share some other books that I've been reading that I enjoy, and might talk about certain authors, might not. We'll see how it goes. Mm-hmm. It's just kind of like in addition to, if you're looking for book recs. I got you. Also, drop your recommendations. Remember to like and subscribe. Give us a rating if you haven't. Let us know your thoughts on Octavia in our comments on YouTube or something. I'm sure you love her. I can't imagine anyone who doesn't. Yeah. And if you do, I'm going to have like some questions. But if you have some recommendations, if you're like, if you like Octavia Butler, then you would like X, Y, Z. Love it. We love that recommendation.
Yeah, I read now. So I actively want to talk about books all the time now. It's like become one of my special interests. I didn't know that this Octavia Butler's books made me love reading again. So if you have anything even remotely similar and you want to talk about it even, or just tell me about it so that I can read it now, I would love you forever. And we can walk off into the sunset reading books.
Yes.
Please.
Yeah. Let's do it. All right. Well, don't get married.
Well, your kids. Where your kids will bury acorns in the ground, sad that you're gone forever.
Yeah. Make some acorn bread. It's fun.
Yeah, it's good.